So we have a pretty raw panel, panel topic. So if you look at it, we have a lot of buzzwords. We have authentic, we have building, we have digital, we have leadership. And you might all be sitting here thinking that after lunch, what is this that we are going to discuss? But the panelists and us, we have talked through this. We have some very interesting viewpoints on each of those words as well, and of course on the panel. So why don't we do this, right? So we will first try to demystify what the topic is, and we will get to what we believe we want to be discussing today. And I'm sure that would be a lot in line with what you also have in mind. So let me do this. Let me start with Dan, and Dan is with TiVo. And let's ask him what authentic digital leadership actually means, and what is it that we intend to discuss here today.
Thank you, Dan Phillips. Broad topic, or it could be a broad topic. The interesting thing about digital transformation or leadership is one of the things that's not a point in time for me. It's, I kind of equate it to, are you on a diet or are you changing your lifestyle? And I think we need to think about that because it touches all aspects. The rate of change that the digital world's brought us is acute. We need to have organizations, people, and that are thinking about how do we deal with rates of change? How do we deal with a data-driven kind of markets in society?
So, Praful, from a startup perspective, what exactly does it mean? Do you anyway live and breathe this every day? What is it that you have in mind that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, good afternoon. Look, from a digital transformation point of view and all, for the high-tech industry that I come and a lot of you come from, we are living and breathing transformation and obsolescence on a continuous basis. And so for us, it's a part of life, and we do that thing and in the industry that we live in. Also, the obsolescence of technology companies is much faster than non-technology companies. So that means we are more aware of digital obsolescence and having to adjust to that. I think being in two startups, 10 years each, WebEx from the very beginning and then RingCentral from almost the very beginning, the digital how it affects the person who is using those technologies or anything in their life is going to have the largest transformation impact on the business. The reason I'm saying it is, I'll give you just a simple example of digital transformation, and just from my background point of view. The industry that RingCentral is in, we were basically, the old industry of that was analog phone systems, PBXs. The smartphones came about and completely became, the whole communication aspect became completely digital. It was not just voice. Smartphone was voice, was 10%. iPhone was 10% phone and 90% not a phone. It was digital. That means the way people started communicating completely differently, just for India is a good example, correct? I mean, a lot of businesses will not operate very well in India today if WhatsApp was taken out. Forget about personal communication. What I'm trying to say is that digital transformation is impacting all these people. And the way the leadership accepts those transformation at that pace that is happening, it's really hard for the non-high-tech industries to understand the impact and actually appreciate the pace at which it may or may not impact in most cases, will impact your business. And that is the hardest thing of any leadership, outside of the high-tech. It is a problem in high-tech, but it's a way bigger problem on non-high-tech.
Interesting. So let's pat it on to Todd, right? So Todd is the HR person here. He's the most knowledgeable among us, at least on the theory side. And why don't you take a stab at what authentic digital leadership actually means?
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'll give yet a different perspective. When I thought about this topic for today, the first thing that occurs to me is a lot of what we've heard thus far today represents times when companies are going through one transformation after another. It's this continuous transformation of the business model. And in all of my years at PepsiCo, at Bank of America, at PayPal, a couple other places, I've seen a lot of those kinds of transformations happen where some new technology is being applied in a way where it really dramatically changes how you run the business and how you deliver value. So that's the first thought for you. And the second thought is because of that history and because to me it's so much about just leadership through transformation and ongoing change, a lot of what digital leadership is, probably 70 or 80% of what great leaders need are a lot of the same core leadership skills that they've needed for many years in many situations where they're going through change. Yes, there are some skills that are probably a little higher weight or higher premium during the kind of wave that we're going through, but I'd leave you with that thought. We can elaborate on. It's a lot of it's about the same kind of leadership skills that we've all been trying to develop for a long time.
Interesting. So it's the same leadership, but what is it that makes it more contemporary? And what are the skill sets that we need now in the digital age? That's something that we'll discuss. We'll move it on to Sunder. Sunder comes from a very interesting perspective. He's led marketing, and he reads a lot of deep stuff, and he has a good perspective on the authentic part of it and overall authentic digital leadership. So Sunder, on to you.
Sure. I think you kind of gave it, but so the way I understand it, or I interpret when we were talking about the topic is, let me break it down into authenticity or authentic, digital, and leadership. Authentic, it has to come from belief, either belief in your own viewpoint or a complete buy-in and belief in what your organization is out to do. There's leadership, which I also look at from two angles. There's the more frequently referred to leadership, which is people who get up on stage, who rally teams, who lead teams, who we all look up to. But there's an aspect of leadership, again, going back to beliefs, that I think everyone, it doesn't matter what level, what seniority you are in, to speak up for your belief, which again ties it back to authenticity. Digital, I actually don't know whether it fits in here.
That's a good point. Do we really need digital leadership, or do we need leadership? I think we will discuss that. And that brings me to the next key question of this that we want to discuss, right? What is the persona of this so-called digital leader? What are the key traits? What is the toolkit of skills that is needed to succeed in this era of digital transformation? So I'll bring it to you, Todd, and why don't you open it for us and give us the broad structure, and then we can move it on and pat it off to the technology guys and the other people.
Well, so back to the premise that it starts with some very fundamental leadership skills that we're always trying to develop in leaders in our companies. So I think that anybody needs, they need to be a great strategist, see around corners, have vision. You need to be great at execution, at making things happen in your organization. You need to be great at building that organization, attracting talent, getting follower-ship. You need to have great emotional intelligence. You need to have learning agility and ongoing curiosity. So those are all things that we've sought in leaders throughout my whole career, every place that I've been. I think that some of the things that might even be on that same list that a lot of companies have, but maybe have a little bit more of a premium in this time and age, would be really being very outside in with your vision, being intensely focused on both your customers and trends that you see in society and technology, and we heard some of that earlier today. There certainly is a need to be technologically savvy and aware of all the topics, so all of you who are attending, if you're learning new things, that's exactly what you should be doing. It doesn't mean that we all have to learn how to code, wouldn't necessarily be such a bad thing, but at least understanding what technology can do for you and what the opportunities that it creates. And then I think you have to, the people I've seen, and I can talk about examples later, have set really audacious goals and have been fantastic at pursuing those really audacious goals. So those are a few of the things that I think there's a premium right now.
So we did hear Frank Kern from Arisent and now maybe Altran speak about being ambitious in the morning, and we've seen one of that being reiterated right now. So let's go to the product side, and maybe Dan, what is it that Maybe let's go into some examples of where you have seen some leaders really succeed, and what is the summary takeaway of your reading into why they have succeeded? What are the key skill sets? And these could be new skill sets, or as Todd mentioned, some that we need to re-emphasize right now.
As Todd said, leadership is leadership, and there's been a consistency through that. Some of the uniqueness about how our world's moved to is the decision making is at a completely different process or level. The hierarchical structure just doesn't really work in this in today's world, and so you've got to get more comfortable with driving leadership down to different points, the breaking down. It really requires that development of an agile way of thinking and an agile process. So those are some really key attributes. And the leader becomes much more of setting direction, leadership as opposed to day-to-day management. All those things are still important, but even more so now.
Interesting. Praful, from your point of view, startup perspective, what are the key traits that you have seen in your own company or in companies you admire? Leaders in those companies?
Yeah, I'm in the startup world, and for being there for 20 years now, the leadership is really, really critical, because you are not talking of a mature company and hiring leaders. You are talking about having a fundamentally disruptive mind or idea. And you need leadership in terms of, first is conviction. Forget about digital part of it, just leadership part of it. Conviction, and then in the technology company, the digital savviness, correct? Now, that part of it, which is transformed in terms of one thing, and one thing is very important, even in any industry, is technology. You need to be obsessive about what some technology or something is going to disrupt your business. Does not mean you have to be in the technology business. The taxi industry got disrupted by a technology company called Uber. This guy, it's amazing. The thing is, somebody in Bombay or Delhi taking a car ride now is paying a toll to Uber in San Francisco. Think of it. And they're happy doing it because they're getting a great service. That is what disruptive, but it's all this is all digital transformation underneath. It has nothing to do with the type of car and who is driving the car. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that basically in the startup world, where I come from, basically where we have done is basically being very disruptive and fundamentally very digitally driven. And the older industries that we disrupt are basically, it's not that the industries are wrong or anything like that, but it's highly difficult for that the old businesses, to be obsessive about digital. They're obsessive about leadership, but not obsessive about the digital part.
Interesting. So Sunder, just leaving it to you for the interesting perspectives that you have seen, not necessarily on the technology side, but either from your customers or your own role in marketing.
Mm-hmm. So I would kind of say leadership is no longer about the person, and it's actually more becoming an attribute of individuals, whether a bigger attribute or a small attribute, but it's becoming an attribute of individuals. And it really comes down to dealing with the unknown. And this is an example of a mentor of mine almost a decade ago at work in my previous jobs told me that what you put on a goal sheet that you can achieve 6 or 12 months from now is not what you're a leader for. It's about dealing with things between now and then. And I think that's a mindset change to how you manage, how you lead. Is predictability is kind of gone out the door. It was going out the door for decades, so it's pre-digital in that sense. But it's really dealing with the unknown. And there's another aspect that I think Dan touched to that I would say is a leadership inversion. I would claim that in marketing as the CMO, I can make the best decisions to align what I'm doing, what my team is doing with the business priority of the company, but I cannot tell most of my teams what they need to do because I actually don't know. But I have to trust them to know what they're doing and trust them to tell me what they think is right. I can kind of debate with them, but it requires that leadership to be inverted, which is actually a reasonable shift of also the environment that we're working in.
Interesting. So what you're saying is you need to get the right leader, and even if you haven't, you need to skill them to the right level to ensure that they can.
I'm
work on
almost
that.
saying that everybody can be a leader. It's about the attribute of leadership that everybody
Perfect.
surfaces.
Yeah, great. So, Todd, I know you had some interesting viewpoints and examples on the key characteristics of these leaders. What exactly and how exactly have you seen it play out? So, if you could give some examples on that, just build on Sundar's point on having the right leader. How do you identify them, and then how do you put them into the right skill sets and give them those characteristics?
Sure. Well, I mean, in all those companies I've been at in more years than I care to admit, I've definitely seen in these transformations the changes in talent that happen, but ultimately you can't buy your way out of a predicament. I mean, ultimately you're going to need to have a combination of developing some of the people that you've got on the team already, together with the occasional hiring of other people. And when you're trying to develop leaders up through your organization, like almost no matter how big your organization is, I'll give you a couple of thoughts. The first one is there's a pretty simple framework that's based both in a lot of research, but it's also just very intuitive. And the idea is that there's three things that affect the development of somebody into greater and greater leadership responsibilities. The first one is experience. And experience probably weighs about 70% in terms of the impact on developing people. The second one is coaching and feedback from great people all around you. And that coaching and feedback is maybe a 20% weight. And then the third one is training, and 10% or less. And that's even when the training is done extremely well. So if you use that simple framework, the first thing to think about in terms of developing people with these qualities that the panel is talking about is you want to do it in the context of creating experiences like real work in their job, their portfolio of what they're responsible for, that helps them build these skills or helps them build in gaps that they may have in their overall leadership skill set. And there are a number of ways to do that. People in the training and development business would talk about that as action learning. The idea of taking a real challenge or opportunity you have in your company that you haven't figured out how to get after yet, take a cross-functional group of high potential people that you're trying to develop, put them on a team and send them off to solve that challenge or that opportunity, and wrap around that some of the other more personal development things you would do to make sure they're getting the most from the learning experience.
Got it. Interesting. So, Dan, you at TiVo have gone through this, right? So, right from making TVs to something that you can't recognize as a TV right now. What were the key traits that you or some of the leaders in TiVo displayed to basically navigate through this digital journey and make TiVo as successful as it is now?
Yeah, TiVo, we disrupted a space and actually moved the television industry into a digital world initially with the time shifting of viewing, but that doesn't stand still. And so the things that have really moved and changed is, and we've had to as an organization, is where's this market going? How can we move along with it? The ability with the focus on customer that I think was mentioned earlier is they want to consume any place, anywhere, anytime. And the big piece that comes into this, and I think it spans all of the transformation, is the use of information. For instance, delivering a better feature. Us, we have new capabilities where we can predict what you want to do next. What you want to see next, where you might want to consume it, and bring in those features to the forefront. We were talking earlier, though, that something's interesting. The use of data now is such a pivotal piece of what we do. But we, as leaders, have got to become good stewards of that data. I think what we're seeing with Mark Zuckerberg and what happened with Facebook is just one example. And it just highlights, I think, for all of us as leaders, so much power in that, bringing it to bear. but also part of that leadership is thinking about how we use it and the authenticity side of
That's
that.
the authentic part of the leadership.
Exactly.
Stress on. Interesting. So Praful, from your perspective, any examples you want to share on how this has been managed and what, according to you, were the skill sets that rode them through this digital transformation?
Yeah, look, in terms of the leaders and in terms of the skill sets and other things, I think one of the most important things for people who come, people who got a lot of experience in older companies or bigger companies and all, one of the hardest things that people have transformation problem in basically is non-hierarchical organization.
Yeah.
People coming from the older world and bigger companies and all used to hierarchical organization, getting basically top down, managing top down, all those kind of, it's a cultural thing. One thing on the startups, and I think that's actually happening even in larger organizations, is essentially a leader who's basically not afraid of having an inverted pyramid. Meaning that the things is basically, if you believe that basically the front line has the most information, and basically the pyramid, instead of the CEO and going down, think of it as the bulk here and coming down. And if you think of it like that, you basically manage differently, you manage it very horizontally, you don't have layers of organization, and you should be able to get input at any level and consider that input as important as any other senior management. The thing is, in this leadership qualities, there is a lot of people, and that's true for it's just human beings, there's a lot of people who like to control. They want to be important. They want to be thought as they're indispensable and only they can control some information, processes, whatever, you know. And I think in this digital transformation thing, it's more cultural, correct? It's basically how do you build a more horizontal organization and empower everybody. That is the only way you can actually move at the pace at which you can move this industry. I think there's one statistic that is very important in this thing, from coming from the old world to the new world. Between 2003 and 2013, at the beginning of 2013, of the Fortune 1000 companies that were in that Fortune 1000 at 2003, at the end of 2013, 70% of the companies were new. That means 70% of the companies had dropped out of the Fortune 1000. Okay? Think of that. And that was before the previous 10 years was 60%.
And they talk about startup mortality.
Yeah. So think of, yeah, exactly. Think of that. I mean, think of that thing. And most of these companies that are come into new and came into that thing, a lot of them are basically things that actually put the previous companies out of business or made them smaller. So the thing is, the transformation is real, but the management is different, the approach is different, the culture is different. Leadership is part of that, and leadership has to drive culture more than anything else.
Interesting. So I think we are seeing an interesting shift in the discussion, right? So we were talking about personal leadership, things that one person needs to do, but we've suddenly started to hear terms like organization structure, process, system. So Todd, what is your take on this, right? Is it just one person, or is it very important to have a good system? If yes, what is it that you have seen, some examples that you've seen to enable these leaders?
Yeah, the punchline is leadership matters a lot, but so does the system that the leaders live in. And I'll tell a more specific example. I've given you a couple of frameworks so far, but I'll talk about my time at PayPal. So I was at PayPal back during a time when product development was totally revamped, shifted from on the engineering side was purely a waterfall development shop, shifted to textbook Agile Scrum, and it was a really fascinating period of time. So we've talked a lot already about the qualities of the individual leaders, and the guy who was the CTO at the time, a guy named James Baresi, who is one of my favorite leaders ever, on a couple of boards now, and the head of product was a guy named Hill Ferguson, who's now the CEO of Doctor on Demand. Great leaders, so they had all these qualities we talked about, but around them was a great system in the company at the time. So from a strategic planning and financial planning standpoint, there was a willingness to make some big bets on certain macro trends in consumer behavior. There was a willingness in the financial planning process to carve out funds to take risks around the transformation that was happening in the company. The product development process itself, of course, became very central to that transformation, and doing that in a way that really accelerated the velocity of product development and getting it out into market. You had to make sure in performance management and rewards that you were creating space for failure. You were creating the ability for the more senior leaders to focus on the longer term results from the transformation. And then you had to both buy some new talent as well as have some good ongoing leadership development programs inside the company to help more people like James come up through the ranks. So when I reflect on that experience, those few years, it was really that whole system coming together at the same time, being aligned, so that those leaders, you could really get the most out of what they could bring to the table.
Interesting. So Sunder, what is your take on this? Is it the system? Does system and also enforce some human aspects? How the culture? What is your key take or example on this?
So I'm going to build on what Todd just said, and there's this notion of the common good. It's actually more at a national and a political level, a book by Robert Reich. But I'm going to apply that in the context of business and corporations, that leadership is about putting the company first, not your department, not your role, not your bonus for this quarter or this year, but putting the company first. And that usually makes the system more important than any individual, including the CEO. And to that extent, I completely agree with what Todd said. And to some of the earlier discussions, I think it's very easy sitting in the valley, I feel, to look down on hierarchies, look down on bureaucracies, but I haven't seen any organization scale without that. So it's not the problem with hierarchies and bureaucracies, it's actually more fundamentally the system not being perfectly executed and compromised because of individuals in the system. But let's not blame the system for the compromises made across the board. And classic example that I think every one of us will relate to in our daily life is loading the dishwasher. Mm-hmm. So if you have your regular daily load, you probably doesn't matter how you stack it, your first plate could go anywhere in the middle and you'll probably still be able to get it all in and loaded and washed. When you have a party, how you load those first few plates and how you use the stacking in the dishwasher is critical for you to get everything into one load, which means you need structure, you need bureaucracy, you need hierarchies, but there's a reason they exist, and that's to scale. And so I'm kind of questioning that systems are arguing that systems are more important, but systems can get bureaucratic and compromised, and that's what to watch out for.
Interesting. So Dan, what is your take on this? Right. So you're part of a large organization that is definitely was in scale, but you're going through this journey of digital transformation where you maybe need a little less of these processes. How did you balance this? What are the bare minimum essential systems and processes that needed to be in place to ensure this success of these digital transformations?
Well, I was first going back to the struggle I was having with my wife on how to load the dishwasher.
I know it's a dear problem.
Yes. And we had a real leadership problem there, and I lost. But going back to the to the organizational aspects of it, yes, you need that structure. You need the ability to manage large organizations. We have nearly 2,000 people that we're managing and lots of contractors. But the rate of change, the decision, I have some of my guys here in the audience. If you ask them, priorities are changing on a constant. New information's coming in on whether it's a competitor has said something at different levels of the organization. So within that, you have to build in that ability to make decisions at whatever level that required, empower people to do and take those decisions, and ability to move within it. And so trying to drive that, and particularly if you're dealing on, we all deal with global organizations. with all kinds of time zones and those things that drive us to a much more agile, I'll go, decision making process.
Great, interesting. I think I've got a lot of takeaways from this panel. I think we've had a very good discussion towards the end. We had a lot of examples, and I hope each one of you have got the value out of this session. And I really thank all my panelists for making it so interesting. Thank you all. Thanks.
You're welcome.